And we are live today here for KTLO, keeping the learning on. What episode is it? See, I have to do this little thing at the beginning of every single one.
It's your thing.
Yeah, I know. It's just, I have to say it. What episode is it? It's episode 43. And today we're going to talk about bubbles of safety. Bubbles of safety. What's that all about? Well, we'll find out. And here at the beginning time, we have our usual core four, our marvelous group of spectacular people. We have Patty Blackstaff. We have Greg Sanker. We have moi. And we have Simone Joe Moore. And this week we found out we were all selected for HDI's top 25 thought leaders, all four of us. That was a spectacular surprise. Thank you, HDI.
Who'd have thunk it, huh?
So depending
Who'd
on
have
your
thunk
bingo
it?
card, you might have just gotten a bingo. Woohoo!
It's a wonderful surprise.
Yeah, how about
All the
that?
way up to that.
Thank you, HDI. Thank you, those that voted. It's very humbling and very quite an honor to be.
I always think it's fascinating because you never know why they're actually voting for you either. It's done completely blind. So you never know who and you never know why.
Right.
And yet we turned up.
And here we are.
There we were.
Go figure.
There we were. And yes, it was a very pleasant surprise. So thank you,
Certainly.
HDI, an informant tech company. Just getting that in there in case you were wondering who HDI is. And you can get hold of us on Twitter with these handles. You can find us on LinkedIn. We'd love to meet with you. And today's topic is all about psychological safety. Wowzer. That's just incredible. And we are in the gallery view. So there, all four of us are here. And the interviewer du jour is Mr. Greg Sanker. So Greg, take it away. Let's see some questions.
Well, let's say we bring our guests in. What do you say? Should we bring our?
Let's bring the guests in.
All right.
Should we do that?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
I would love to see our guests today.
Do we pick on them when they arrive?
Absolutely.
No, that's not safe. Kathy!
Kathy, you'll have to watch the recording of this.
Well, I had to try to get in a couple times.
The setup was perfect. No, we're in on demand.
Ah,
Yes, we have the waiting room outside. So thank you for coming, Kathy.
yes, absolutely. I'm looking at the wall now. I want to go close the last panel.
Wow, psychological safety. You want to set the stage there, Roy?
Sure. Psychological safety, basic definition. What the heck are we talking about? Simply put, it's where people feel genuinely comfortable doing their job. They can be fully themselves. They have trust and respect to challenge and question and make a contribution. And that's a really rudimentary definition. And I'm sure that we're going to expand on that and get into some detail. And we have another Kathleen. We have Kathleen Wilson with us now.
Kathleen. I've been talking.
Hi, Kathleen.
Welcome, Kathleen.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Still connecting.
No, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. No video.
Yeah, just give me a second to put the video on because it's just like I have to shut down a few. I'm not supposed to use Zoom at work, so I have to shut down Teams and a few other things first.
we all do that.
Just so you're aware, Kathleen, we are live on YouTube and recording.
Oh, good God. Maybe no video. I'm just going to go with no video.
So
That's perfectly fine.
today we're going to be talking about psychological safety. bubbles of safety, and that's, it's kind of an interesting spin. It kind of is born out of a number of conversations that this group has had, and some of the stuff that we see happening in the industry. But to get things started off, I want to go to Patty, who has a more academic or more functional definition of, she gives me that look like, why did you say that? A more functional definition of what psychological safety is. Patty, what is it?
Okay, so not academic myself. However, let me let you know kind of a little bit about what it means to me when I'm talking to leaders about psychological safety. So it's people's perception of the consequences of taking an interpersonal risk in a particular context like the workplace. So there are some people who believe psychological safety, and this is what it is not, is that it is individual, or you can say whatever you want, or that you can be your authentic self, be who you are at home at the same place as work. And that is not psychological safety. It's not about bringing your whole self to work or using this crazy radical candor. It is truly about being able to what it is making a willing contribution of ideas and actions toward a shared goal, openly sharing and contributing information and knowledge from where you are, that you can speak up with suggestions for organizational improvements without consequences for having done so that will hurt you as an individual or a worker, that you can take the initiative to develop new products, new services, that you belong in more of a collaborative source, and that your team can increase their learning. It's really about adding value to the value stream. And the reason that's important is because of the shift in organizations. So organizationally, when we've moved for the last number of years since the 90s from kind of that command and control to a more collaborative, needed workspace. And technology has actually informed and advanced the ability to do that. And so while we're increasing the importance of collaborative work in organizations, we need to ensure that people are safe to be able to contribute in a way that they aren't stuck with the fear of speaking up, or that their roles aren't unclear and they're not punished if they're sidestepped, that kind of thing. So that's my little ball of wax in terms of psychological safety as I talk to leaders about it.
So that wraps up the session on psychological safety. I mean, that's it right there, right? That's it.
No.
So
it's such a big topic, though. There's so much, so much. We'll never cover it all here.
And well, I'm hoping we do justice to it, but I don't think that we can go in all directions. But my point, Patty, was that was so self-evidently the right thing for organizations to do, because it's both good for people, good for organizations, good for performance of the organization, which if you're a for-profit organization turns into profitability, effectiveness, efficiency, all those good things. Roy, how come managers have such a hard time doing that then? Well, if it's so self-evident that that's the right thing to do, why do we struggle with that? What's the problem?
Well, the big problem is ego, right? Managers want to make sure that they maintain control. They're the most important voice. And sometimes, we tend to forget this, but managers also have the same fears that we have when they look upward to whoever it is, the board of directors or the next level up in the senior management or whatever. They have the same fears that we do. They don't want to be too safe because they want to control the messages that reach higher up. So from them and from everybody that that is in their purview. So leaders have to be careful too.
So we're all the way back to a fear culture. But if I'm a manager that's feeling the strain, why wouldn't I want to get honest feedback? The feedback that I really, really need to solve the real problem so that we can really be successful. Why wouldn't I want that?
Because honest feedback might be negative. And that might be perceived to affect the performance of my unit or my company. And so you want to control that message. You want to make sure that it's the positive thing that you want to display upward instead of the real message. And that often, the real message often gets lost.
So let's turn towards the people. Simone, you do a lot in the complementary health, uh,
Mhm.
uh, and combining that with how we do organizational change management. So, like, how do you see OCM shifting in the from the practitioners, the folks that are out doing this? How do you see that shifting to create more or be more intentional about creating psychological safety as we navigate change?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of change to do with change, one might say. Yes, the approaches are being adjusted. We're not saying that a lot of the ones that we already have in our toolbox aren't important, but also looking at them from different perspectives and how we might apply them. So emotional intelligence and the competencies around that are being further extended into things like emotional agility, and getting much deeper. We're looking more closely at science flow mechanics and the wear, tear, rest and repair cycles, resilience building. You will have heard some of this already being talked about in the recent months. But it's quite interesting because the term psychological safety was first coined by Warren Bennis and Edgar Schein back in 1965. So it's not like this is a new title or a new understanding as such, but certainly the context in which we're in. I'm following a lot of Timothy R. Clark's work. He's an Oxford social scientist and author of, there's a new book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. And it was through my work in emotional intelligence I first came across his work. He talks about 4 stages where human beings feel included, it's safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to challenge the status quo, all without that fear of being embarrassed or marginalized or punished in some way, which we talked about. Now, what I have found with the organizations I work with, especially in their first throes of having to adjust or create this psychological safety state, they start with stage 3, the contributor safety level. Now, it's our basic human need to want to do that. We want to make a difference. We want to be part of the team, and we want to, co-create value as we've done in our world. But most of them are failing because they can't discover the possibilities if they're missing the first fundamental 2 stages. And that's the space at the core of what it means to be human. So inclusion safety being the first one, it fits perfectly with my humanizing IT working principle of people connected. That's stage 1. A human center of gravity can change, so helping them feel safe is a real imperative. It's part of helping them be able to move in that ebb and flow and participate in change as a natural occurrence. Stage 2, learner safety. Now, knowledge is a natural byproduct of people being connected. So you can almost see that by focusing on how people connect first, then looking at how they learn and that lifeblood of the organization we have in terms of our knowledge, this is where we want to make sure that people feel safe to engage, ask the questions. It's okay to, have a safe to fail experimentation style. It jumpstarts people's thinking. It allows them the freedom to question. It's a place to really start to optimize or transform. People are going to be more willing to take a risk and develop their resilience during that learning process. It's only after those 2 that then stage 3 can really happen, that we can truly feel we can contribute. So that then moves on to challenger safety, which is the 4th step. And this is where, you didn't come this far only to come this far. That works with my final principle around realizing potential. So quite often people are looking to external solutions when the capability really already exists within them. And they just need someone to help them see it and understand how to use it. And that's where I bring in my art of mixology, I guess, around the frameworks and approaches.
So OCM is a whole body of work, a body of knowledge, et cetera. It's been practiced for quite some time, but from a project standpoint, isn't that where we normally engage OCM, which is really just a keyword for hire a contractor to make sure everybody accepts this and make sure everything gets adopted? I mean,
they need to do, those approaches have to be built in at the cultural level. It has to be right at leadership intent when they first start.
yeah, and I'm hoping that we can get into that, but I'm going to go over to Patty. Patty, I mean, when you've done OCM work, I mean, where, you're called in, you and I have talked about this a lot, where you get called in, after the resistance starts building. Hey, Patty and company, come in and make everybody happy. Like, why doesn't that work?
Make it nice for the
It's a
people.
loaded question.
Just make it nice for the people. As though there's this magic wand that if I send the right communication or the right email, everybody's going to do a little happy dance at their desk and say, yay, yay, this is going to make me change my behavior. Listen, if we're putting in an enterprise tool anywhere, no one is going to magically change their behavior because you spent $2.7 million buying some software, right? There is this absolute need for inclusion, learning, all of the steps that Mr. Clark, Dr. Clark actually puts through are, inclusion, learning, contribution, and challenge are absolutely the way that you start, and you start from the beginning. You need an OCM to understand and do the discovery in the onset of what that's going to do to the culture, to the organization, to the behaviors before you even choose your vendor.
That's so spot on. I'm just marveling at the number of programs or projects that I've been a part of where really OCM is viewed as an adjunct to the actual, let's get this thing done. And the vision has already been set, and the goals and objectives and the requirements and all those things are set. And so OCM is viewed simply as get people on board of what we're already doing.
It's often an afterthought. And I think that there are things you can do if you're pulled in as an afterthought, but really ideally you would want that person to be part of your team on the onset for sure.
So Roy, doesn't that create a little bit of a built-in tension? If you say, this is what we're doing, that's already tried and true, you weren't part of that, get on board. Doesn't that create a little bit of a either get on board or keep your mouth shut, which is anti-engagement, which is anti-safety?
Well, sure. And I think we think about the resistance to change, organizational change. Right. We talk about change resistance, right? It is that, but it's also status quo bias. We have it okay now. We're getting our work done. So the first thing that happens is you approach me to do organizational change, and I say, oh, so what I'm doing is wrong now? You told me last month you said it was right. Now you're telling me you don't want to do it that way anymore. So this is wrong. So there's that. There can be a lot of antagonism. And the quote I always use is somebody said in a meeting one day, yesterday I knew how to do my job. Today I don't. And that is a huge, huge problem. And I just wanted to mention, Greg, that you talk about change enablement, change management from an IT perspective, IT changes, and organizational change. We're talking about how important it is to get that up the chain and start from the beginning. And you approach IT change management the same exact way. Get it up the pipeline as far as you possibly can. Do it from the beginning. It's not, as you often say, the Deming principle. You don't bolt a quality control on at the end. You have to build it in from the beginning.
That's exactly
same
right.
principle.
So, Patty, I don't know if you remember, but last week we were talking about the power of asking good questions, and you and I both responded. Others probably did as well. But Kathy said something that Kathy Velbin, one of our guests, said something that I think was really interesting. She said she talked about the difference between fearless, no space, and fear space less. Talk about that.
Well, listen.
We didn't follow up on that.
Yeah, we don't. I loved that. I actually wrote it down and drew pictures around it because, and that's kind of how I take notes. I'm a visual learner. Being fearless in an organization means you have the climate and the environment to do so. Fearing less means that the culture needs to shift so that I do not have to come at it with fear in order to do my job well and excel at my job. I would like to approach it by fearing less is what I got from that. And it's complicated because we're a complex adaptive system, right? We get an organization, we plunk it in there. And if you could eliminate all the people, it absolutely makes sense on paper. Everything makes sense on paper. But once you start adding personal dreams, aspirations, desires, past experiences, careers, hopes, the wish to be rewarded, the inability for every personality to work with every other personality, and then try to apply all of that to the mission of the organization, which must be met regardless, you have a complex system. And complexity increases when fear increases, because the mission gets lost, completely lost, in the drama of all of those complex things coming together. And so we end up spending and spending a lot of our time in intolerable situations that have nothing to do with the mission, right? So and perception is based on experiences. So how we feel about expressing opinions and collaboration and challenging really comes from the top. And I can't stress that enough. The ability to feel safe comes from the top, but there are multiple tops. There is the board. We talked about this, in a number of different episodes in the past. There's the board, then there's the C-suite, then there's your executive, then there's your directorship and your management in many organizations. And each one of those has a leader that can create their own bubble, depending on how they protect their people. And so that's where bubbles came from, right? Safety bubbles all have a top person. If you can get it culturally at the top of the organization, you're doing something pretty cool. But oftentimes, not all organizations work that way because they're complex. And of course, so then we have these bubbles within the organization that have their top leader protecting their team from, say, an unsafe environment or working to make team dynamics safe.
Wow. That could be a whole episode. What do you say you and I go get a cup of coffee afterwards and we just talk about that for about 4 hours? I mean, it's huge. But what's the difference between creating a safety bubble and good old fashioned protect my team? I'm going to make sure I have the staff I need. I'm going to make sure I get the funding and resources I need. And frankly, I don't really care about you. That's up to you, right? I'm playing to win for my team. How is that different than creating bubbles of safety? Anybody, okay. But I'm looking at you, Patty, because.
Okay, so what we need to do based on old managerial styles is we need to unlearn management and relearn leadership. So management is about process and policy and how I'm in my budget and my spreadsheet and all of those pieces that are really important to making the department function so that you can give the resources to the people. But that's not leadership. Leadership is more about the people and humanity and how they contribute and how they add value. And so when you're protecting your employees, you need to protect them in multiple spaces, not just I've given them the resources, go team. You absolutely need to allow their knowledge and understanding to increase, because we've shifted. We're not just putting grommets onto widgets anymore. We're literally knowledge workers, most of us, and most organizations have shifted to the knowledge worker. And if we're not utilizing their expertise and opening the door to collaboration, we're failing the organization.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the shift is when I don't know that we ever put grommets on widgets, but when that was the goal, when that was the gig, it didn't so much care. It didn't so much matter if people were intellectually engaged. But when we're a modern organization, that is our means of production, if you will, is getting people engaged, and people who are reserved, people who are stepping back, people who are withholding what they know. Or here's another one, in an unsafe environment, and this will open a whole ball of wax that I'm going to shut down myself. But when I have a great idea, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep my mouth shut, and I'm going to go start a nighttime gig and start a company on the side because I think that's a really great idea and I'm going to go profit from it. So I'm going to shut that down. Simone, you have been dying to get in here because you talk a lot about being boundaries between the various elements. So this is all you. Go.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about boundaries then, but it was when you were talking about grommets on widgets. I couldn't stop laughing.
Top of my head.
I know, but I just have this visual of Daniel Breaston and Paul Wilkinson actually spinning on top of a widget, pointing their fingers as they go around.
Anybody that's artistically inclined, go ahead and get grommets on widgets.
Oh dear. Anyway,
boundaries.
Oh, you just made my Friday afternoon with that one. That's a real giggle. Yeah, boundaries. Actually, okay. See, moment of fearlessness right then. I liked what you said, Patty, about that, fear less is actually a shift that's needed. And that's what happens with our boundaries. I like that focus because coming from my EI and complementary health place, fearless to me just means that my amygdala is not going to hijack me right then and then in that moment. And I think the fear less shift is actually needing to nudge or bust some of those boundaries. I think an example might be, because of our own fear, we might not stand up in a meeting or say something in a meeting where we feel because of we don't feel safe, but yet we wanted to protect someone else at the same time, but our own fear has held us back, in shock and our inability to stand up. But there's still a responsibility for us, there's still an imperative to provide that and help that person go beyond the fear. So we have to figure out what are those things we can do for ourselves. That can be physical placement in meetings. It can be, the impacts around our mental safety on the way we're positioned. Now, controlling the physical environment is not necessarily a negative thing. But really, do I need to throw myself in front of a bullet, that instantaneous safety for someone else in that meeting? Or is there a better way of going about it? And I believe there are better ways, and building our resilience in our toolbox in that, and making a bigger impact from that perspective. I want to thank Daniel Breaston for pointing me to an article on soonersaferhappier.com. Welcome, Daniel. That was very well timed as you came in the door. And we also learned this from Dave Snowden in his complexity work and studies. In the article, Edgar Schein he's a former professor at MIT Sloan School of Management. He says, learning only happens when survival anxiety is greater than learning anxiety. Now, that learning anxiety comes from being afraid to try something new through fear. We don't want to look stupid or be embarrassed or have ourselves put down for it. And that can threaten, our identity and our self-esteem. But that's a threshold. There's a threshold with that. How far do we have to push our need to survive in that role, our need to know in order to stay in that role and do our best in that role and perform, versus what we need to learn? I think that psychological safe environment can only come from support, coaching, to help increase survival anxiety, but it's really about what most organizations intentionally or unintentionally do. One example that's very recent, and it's part of cultural organizational change approach around mental health, is there are new mental health first aider roles and resilience building. But it's not enough because, again, they're still looking at that contributor level. They're not going right back to the core of inclusion safety and learner safety. And there's still a big cultural stigma around mental health and the behaviours that go with that. And that still currently exists. And that also has to be looked at in the context of country legislation. So there's a few, boundaries can be somewhat elastic. I'd rather not it go so wide that it flings back and whacks me in somewhere where I don't want to feel the pain. But I'd rather look at where are the boundaries, where can we shift them, where do they need to shift, how are we going to shift those? And that will be very much contextual.
All right. So speaking of shifting, we're going to shift now and see if we can get our guests to chime in. And the first one I want to call on, partly because I pick on her like one of my own, Kathy V. You're the one that said fearless versus fearless. And we've been talking about what you said, but we haven't asked you. What did you mean by what you said? This is your turn.
Well, the difference between being fearless and fearing less and I talk about this always for the new people, always from a technical support perspective, is fearless is recklessness, trying things in a customer system or in production environment that are risky. But fearing less is part of, to me, part of psychological safety. If you're fearing less, you have, and go back to all the things that you guys were talking about, you're willing to speak up. And when you create, now I'm going to tie the fearing less into the psychological safety, which is also not just psychological safety and the things we've talked about. It's a sense of belonging, which is a basic human need. And if people feel that they belong, that they're safe, that their job is safe, if they begin to fear less, if they don't act in that mode of always protecting themselves, building their self-esteem, getting them to actually self-realization where they will try more things because they were in a safe place to try things in the first place. And, also that means that we as leaders can't just be saying these things to our team. We have to be acting them ourselves because, we go back to children watching their parents do as I say, not as I do. I have to demonstrate psychological safety to my team. And if I want my team to really have that sense of belonging and that camaraderie and I've got your back type of thing, we also have to be demonstrating things such as, happiness, walking around and being generally happy, because people don't feel that type of energy. If they're not feeling joy and happiness themselves, you get it suffocates people. And so you get then those people, and I want to talk about the people that have knowledge, and take those people that have knowledge and actually have all those years of experience. They have the wisdom that you want to be getting out of them, and maybe into a knowledge base or working with others, but you want to get those people to fear less and be able to speak up, help others speak their mind and contribute.
Awesome. So in a way, I feel like, okay, let's just wrap it up right there. You got it. Kathleen, most of us on here have known you for, well, you're not very old, so for not very long, but for a very long time.
I am old, but thank you.
No, I'm old.
That was called the quick sidestep, wasn't it, Greg?
No, I was talking earlier about, it's like this hair is actually black. I don't know what's happening with the Zoom interface here.
So
but
how safe are you feeling right now, Kathleen?
I'm fearless, though. That's my problem. I'm known for being fearless.
How safe is Greg feeling?
Yeah,
he's fine.
What's your experience with psychological safety within organizations? Both good, bad, good examples of managers who contributed to, individuals who boldly moved into it. What's your space?
Well, I can give a really good example because the organization that I work for is going through a massive cultural shift, like massive. Like I love working at this place right now versus if when we first met, it was a very trying place to be. And, we were in a position with a lot of our people who work in customer service where somebody very senior came into the organization and, they were doing a roundtable, and safety to say things also requires some coaching as well, because if people aren't familiar with speaking to very senior people, you don't tell them all your problems. Like you don't go deep really quickly. And I worked with these people afterwards because they blurted out some stuff. They went too deep with somebody very senior who it didn't matter. The messaging didn't matter to them. And the person was very remorseful after it. And it's just like, okay, there's a balance of being safe, but there's also coaching. You need to tell people, it's like, here are my circles of safety. So I don't look at it as being flat and very linear. You need to be very, okay, thank you, Patty. It's an honor being clapped in by you, but you need to look at people and you need to coach them with it. It's like, it is safe. And these people, again, they were service desk people who have now gone into program management roles. They haven't been in a situation where, you've got to debate to get your next feature in the product, right? Like, and sometimes it's hard, right? And you speak your authentic self and everything. And, they're in customer service, their intent was good. But when you have somebody so senior and you just like, blurted out something. It's just, it didn't matter to him. So I think, yes, you need to be when you're moving to an organization where it's supposed to be good to be your authentic self, you also need to understand how authentic can you be, right? Like where there are, as I said, I'm not going to say boundaries. I'm going to say more like, I'm thinking of like Venn diagram or something like that, like circles of safety. What I can say to this
Gray
leader.
areas or filter points or
Exactly.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I was trying to
Like-
think, Kathleen, there's a being situationally aware, right? So like when I'm a guest at the board room speaking, it's like, I understand that I'm not candid about everything within my organization, but within the context of understanding who are these individuals, what are their drivers, what are their concerns, and how do I address the relevant issue in a way that's authentic to me and the situation, and they get the information they need. And it's the same with dealing with employees all across. So I think there's that. I like your idea of a Venn diagram. It's like,
Yeah.
It's not that you're unsafe. It's just that it's inappropriate in this context to be in that. Yeah. Does that make sense?
And is it a gray hair thing? Like,
Right.
is it something well, I'm not calling you out on it and,
Yes,
and
you
being
are.
my authentic self right now, but like, is it something, as I've 20 plus years in the consulting industry. So it's just one of those things, is like what I would have said when I was younger and I was being bold and I was being brave, people kind of went, well, you need to back off a bit. But is it something that you just kind of know it's like, this is the right time to say it, or the right people to tell this message to?
I love it. Kathleen, you have
How things are framed matters.
exactly.
Yeah.
Kathleen,
Yeah.
you have to come back. You have to come back on the show again. All right.
I think there's a difference between bold and sassy, right?
Which are
Yeah,
yours?
and I always just preface it, if it's a hard message, this is with love and cookies, right? Because I'm being authentic right now because you just stepped in a pile, right? And this is with love and cookies because I want to stop you from doing a face plant in that pile. So I'm just going to love and cookie you right now, but I will definitely come back. This is fun.
That's awesome. All right.
So she has to come back for a very, very, very important reason. Is that the last time Kathleen and I were on a video together, I was doing an interview with Kathleen at a conference for a video, and I had the same jacket on. So she thinks this is the only jacket I ever have. So that's the only
but
reason.
it wasn't appropriate to say that in this.
But it was appropriate to talk about gray hair.
Greg, you led with it, so
You opened the door, buddy.
yeah, you did. I apologize.
I created my own bubble of safety.
You made it a
You
safe
did.
topic.
I did make it a safe topic. All right. Roy, I'm going to come back to you. One of the things that we've talked about is that organizations make mistakes in creating a false sense of safety, oftentimes under the guise of, hey, tell us what you think on the employee survey. We really want to get employees engaged, and then potentially misuse that. Or to Patty's point is, we perceive that there might be consequences of being that candid. Talk to me about that.
So one of the things that people have to understand, people who are designing and distributing organizational surveys, pulse surveys, they're usually called, to their employees, is that they always say, this is anonymous. No, it's not. It's never anonymous, ever, ever, ever anonymous. And not even talking about the technical side of it, which, we can track that back to your IP address, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Forget that. Just remember the fact that they break these surveys down into groups and teams and departments. And so there are 6 responses from a 6-person department, one of which is yours. Well, you know what? Your boss is going to know what you said because they know you. So it's never, ever, ever anonymous. So that's one thing. And you always have that in your mind. When you're taking an employee survey, you know who's going to be looking at this. You know what they're going to think when you say what you said. So that's one way that, and then I've also seen this one. After the pulse survey, there's the call, and you're going to discuss the results. And I happened to be on one of these calls not so very long ago. when the senior leader of the entire division jumps into the call, and the first thing that person does is usurps the leadership of the person who's supposed to be leading the call. Second thing that person does is saying, well, I'm not so sure I trust the data. Okay, well, why did I waste my time taking the survey, and why are we even talking about it? Right? I mean, so creating the bubble of safety at that level is say, okay, these surveys are anonymized to the extent that we can do it. Yeah, could we figure out who you are? Yes, but it's okay. Tell me what you think. That's the important part. Tell me what you think, because I need to know from the perspective of how can we improve if we don't know where the problems are. We need to know what those problems are in order to move forward. So that's the key.
You're on mute, Greg.
I know, I never make that mistake. Dang. I was in an organization that was going through massive change. I mean, really, really big change. And so we did one of these employee engagements, and that was early enough in my career, speaking about being young and bold. And I was like, I'm going to tell them what they need to know. I'm going to give it because that's why we're going to do it. And so one of the things that wasn't just me, because apparently other people thought the same way, was we need better communication. What's behind this change? Why is this important? Da, 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 da. And in response to the survey, I kid you not, was we get more email about why the change is important and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh, we didn't say more email, we said more communication. In fact, more communication could have been less verbose, less verbiage, less blastograms, and more engagement. So I've always kept that in my mind. It's like, you be careful what you ask for, because you might just get it. Exactly. Patty, in organizations, you sit at the boardroom, you sit at the senior executive level, and it's all about getting business done, right? So why should I care if I'm a senior VP? Why should I care about this thing called psychological safety? It sounds like stuff we delegate to HR and hope that everybody feels better, right?
It's something that often gets delegated and pushed off, but there's a real cost. And I think it's incredibly important to understand those costs. Culture and people, humans are both remarkable and problematic, and how we support their ability to contribute innovatively for the growth of the company is important. I'm going to start with 3 interesting stats that I ran across on Sapien Labs. And one of them is that 65% of employees said that they would forego a pay raise to see their leader fired.
Wow.
That's 65% would forego a pay raise. Now that's something leaders need to think about. If that is out there in a I think it was 1,500 companies that were gathered together. 2 other stats that are important to understand is that 77% of leaders think and believe they engage and motivate their people, and 82% of their direct reports disagree. So when you look at the stats, there are some costs underlying there that maybe we need to think about. And I've broken those into 3 different areas. One is financial, the other one is individual, and the other one is organizational. So what's the financial cost? Well, those are huge, and we don't track them against the benefits of specific types of cultural dynamics, tolerances, and leaders. And that's legal damages from mental injury, rehiring costs from high turnover, which is approximately across the board $4,400 a person, and that doesn't include training. Now, training costs of specialized people can go up to $100,000 by the time the new person is brought up to what that specialist was capable of doing. Mental health care costs increase from $4,500 per person to over $10,000 per person in unsafe environments. The increase in benefit costs for employee assistance programs, drug plans, stress leave, you name it, employee contract buyouts over negligence. So that's the financial piece that impacts the entire bottom line. For individuals, they say there's an average, in the average office of about 10,000 employees, 1,000 will suffer depression at any one time or another. And the World Economic Forum put out an estimate that by 2030, global mental health problems, so this is tapping on something Simone said, will top over $6 trillion globally. So 1 in 5 adults will have a clinical mental disorder over time, and anxiety in the workplace tops the lot. Frustration, stress, increased heart problems, diabetes, chronic illnesses, because there is something that happens physiologically when you are dealing with cortisol as opposed to oxytocin, which are, cortisol is your fear hormone and oxytocin is your passion hormone, things that drive me and excite me. Absenteeism, decreased motivation, diminished internal relationships, concentration, physical tasks, attention to detail, communication, those are all individual costs. But then you look at the organization, $31 to $51 billion a year is lost in productivity alone based on issues that I've driven, in the financial and individual area. So you see stunted performance, halted innovation, a lack of collaboration across functions, the depletion of your competitive edge, and a reduction in margins. So companies need to track the drains to the company and hold them up against the poor leader that is causing issues within the organization. So I'll give you an example. I worked for a company and there was a fellow that absolutely created the most horrible environment within that organization, cross-functionally, and he was incredibly competitive and nasty. And he was also bringing in a lot of revenue. And no one ever took the time to map the costs across the organization that he was causing with the revenue he was bringing in. And I can guarantee you the costs were significant. Companies have to be clear on what they tolerate, what they don't tolerate, what the consequences associated with that are, especially consequences. Boards can define performance at their top level based on a triple bottom line. And that triple bottom line is not just profit anymore, it's profit, people, and planet. And that's a shift we're seeing in some organizations, that it really is coming about slowly, but it's coming. And employees need to measure the perceived safety within their organization and act accordingly. So when an employee comes in, you don't just immediately start taking your value and throwing it out there. You need to really take a pulse of the organization and define whether it's safe to do so. Do your job well, but when it comes to going that extra mile, really be cautious, because you don't know the organization you've walked into. Pay attention to people's experiences.
So I said, as a senior VP, get my attention. You got my attention. I don't care how big of an organization you are, Fortune 10 to a startup. When you say billions of dollars, you got my attention. And so I think it's the order of magnitude. Just curious, I'm not challenging your numbers, but were those global stats, or was that US, or
So 31 to 51 billion is actually Canada alone.
So
when you look at that. So
okay.
that's in a country that has, far less number of employees than the US does.
Right. Okay. So that's just a kind of a general order of magnitude thing. And I think if one were to think that the US would be less than that because of cultural superiority, I think you're sadly mistaken. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. So Roy, I want to shift now our focus to, all right, so we understand the problem, we understand why it's important, but what do we do? So Roy, what have you ever done in an organization? What have you ever done, Roy? Have you ever done anything? Roy, you've been a leader in an organization, you've led teams, and you've exhibited bold leadership. You've told lots of really great stories, but I want to ask you to talk about a little bit about what have you done to create a safe place for those over whom you have some level of influence?
Well, you have to start with yourself, right? So you can't be the person who snitches on people. You can't be the person who takes advantage of the information you get from them to increase your power or increase your influence up. You can't be that guy. You don't want to be that guy. You don't be that guy. That's one thing. The other thing is just creating an atmosphere in which people feel comfortable with you. And that is one of the things that I really tried to do everywhere was consistently, management by walking around is a wonderful thing. And it's something I've always done. And used to rack up a lot of miles on a big office campus by going around and just finding, where is my team? What are they doing right now? What's up? How can I help? What's going on? What are you running into? All of those, and let them feel comfortable with you. Aside from the chocolate distribution I used to do, which was, toward the end of the day, I'd walk around and leave a chocolate on everybody's day. Everybody who liked chocolate got a chocolate. People who didn't like chocolate got a cookie, got something else. But I knew who the chocolate lovers were, and I wanted them on my team. Let's just put it that way. But set that tone, make it comfortable for them to be able to talk to you, and don't gather ammunition to use for future retribution. I mean, that's key.
Yeah, people pay attention to that. They make note that I shared that with you and now it's being used against me. Wow, not safe. So if this whole thing of safety is such a big deal, why bubbles? Simone, I'm picking on you.
As you do on a regular basis.
I do.
I love it.
Why just bubbles? Why not just create organizations where general?
I was thinking about what Roy said. There's been a number of experiences where it's where a person's role has meant to have been one of those that you could trust in, and only to discover to your great heartache and later debilitation that it was not so. And it's really soul destroying. It really is when you feel like you've met a trusted person. But it just made me think of bubble, toil and trouble, which of course is a take on the witches and Macbeth. But as a kid, I can't lie. I mean, I used to love all the bubble sticks in the machines, and you guys actually know I do have because they're so pretty. And there's something really magical about bubbles. It's beautiful, light changing colors, and it's feel good. But think about that for a moment when we think about bubbles of safety, because this is the suds rub. If you notice with those bubble machines, sometimes the little bubbles join and make bigger bubbles. So start thinking about all the teams and the way your organization is, and the little bubbles start creating bigger bubbles. The issue with that is it only takes the slightest of changes, a breath of wind, a touch of a finger, a shift in temperature, those bubbles burst. And when they do, they can do so in a really tsunami-like way. So whether we've built our private or professional circles, our little bubbles there, the bubble that I happen to be in is not exclusive. This is where that thing of inclusion comes in. But what we have to understand is that someone else is part of another bubble, and then they've got someone in their bubble part of another bubble, and so on and so forth. So exponentially, given our social networks and the relationship nexus that we have within our organizations, there are bubbles and overlapping bubbles. I think, Kathleen, this is where your Venn diagram comes in, our overlapping ones. But what this means is that feeling safe gets complicated very quickly. And you can't be siloed. And we've always talked about not wanting to create silos. So if you're in a bubble, be careful it's not a silo. Otherwise, we're not going to have that exponential growth that we need, and the interactions and people connected, that knowledge doesn't get shared. We won't discover those possibilities, and we can't realize our potential.
Kathleen, I got to get you off mute for that, because when she was talking about that, I was thinking Venn diagrams too, and she talked about the little bubbles joining with or being adjunct to bigger bubbles. Do you have more on where you were going with that, the idea of bubbles and contextual awareness and whatnot?
Well, I think, as we've worked through our careers, we have friends at work and then we have colleagues at work, right? So I think it's like, not to label people, but it's like this person I can be totally honest with, or I've had a previous work experience with them. So it's just like what I can say is broader to them. And, these people are maybe newer to my bubble or circle in my vendor. I'll use bubbles because that makes Simone happy and it makes me happy as well. But the idea is that you need to understand, be like aware of the person. We've done, like, in some organizations you kind of do these profiles of who you are. I did emergenics just recently and everything, just so how do I show up to my boss, right? And he's like, to the point, very structured person. So me, going on about how my weekend went, so I'm wasting his time, right? So and maybe this goes to emotional intelligence, is to know who you are. I work with a lot of software engineers, right? For me to build a stronger personal out of work relationship with them takes longer. So my initially, when I start talking to you, it's got to be all business. Be very, very careful and give them time to speak, right? Because some of them internalize a lot more before they actually speak, because they're actually building what they're going to do for you at the end. So I think it's like, yes, your bubbles will overlap. Some of your bubbles won't even touch at all, though, right? So and you have to be, and maybe that's where we get back to that psychological safety. It's like, you can't say anything that was in that bubble to, like, I can't talk to Patty because I've just met Patty like on a Zoom call today. So I have to be very careful when I'm sharing with, what I find out with Patty that I share with Simone, who I've known a lot longer, or Greg, right? So, and it's difficult because the way people are being brought into the workforce nowadays, like, their ideals are completely different than mine when I first started. And I'm like, whoa, like, no, 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 no. You gotta
It's all the
boundaries.
excitement of the adventure, isn't it?
Isn't
Of
it?
finding your people.
Hey, this conversation could go into overtime, which I'm not allowed
Yeah.
to do. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn it over to Patty real quick for a parting shot. What do we do? What do bosses and employees? What's your top? How do we create a safer place?
Okay, I'm looking at the time and thinking I don't have speed talking skills, but bosses, they need to be humble enough to have a deep curiosity that focuses on diversity of perspective. Bottom line, that triple bottom line thing, profits, people, and planet, varied management styles, recognition that we all come to the table differently, but they also need to set clear expectations with well-defined context, be open to experimentation. And here's the ticker: practice mindfulness, attend to the importance in the budget of supporting coaching and training at all levels of the organization, and build trust, then learn how to keep that trust. So that's the boss's world, right? Clarifying those roles, plans, and goals, but also with a human side to it. Employees and teams can learn who's dependable, be part of a team charter, define your mental models as a team, do some sense making and collaborative understanding of the mission and the value to value stream. Learning attitudes make a difference in terms of saying, what did we learn from this? How are we going to improve as a group? And that opens the door to safe conversations. Try to avoid cynicism, but be critical. Observe the experiences, because it's the experiences that drive the perception of safety. And an organization, I say, track the drains to the company, define what you tolerate or don't tolerate, define performance based on humanity as well as revenue, measure the perceived safety within the organization, and really keep a pulse on the culture and how people feel. And then look at a clearly defined purpose, because the mission of the organization is actually important to help people understand the complexity and adaptability of where they come from and how that leads to the mission.
All right.
So, whew.
That was your speed. Roy, let's take it to the end. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining.
Hey, good job being the interviewer du jour today, Greg. Thank you for doing that. It's a pleasure to be here again, episode 43. Guess what comes next week? episode 44. It's like every week it's another. It's amazing how that works. I think it has something to do with numbers, but let's not get into that. So we hope you can join us again next time. Thank you to Kathleen Wilson for coming by today, to Daniel Breston for popping in just after we were talking about grommets. And if you've been around episodes previous to this, you know what a grommet is. And Kathy Veldboom, who is one of our stalwart guests here. Always good to see you, Kathy. And thank you to the Core 4, Patty, Simone, and what's your name? Oh, Greg. That's it. And we'll see you next time here on KTLO, keeping the learning like that way, I guess. Okay. See you next time.